Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and I would tend to think that any true Christian would pretty much agree with that statement, that the examined life is not worth living. Now, we're not talking about any form of intellectualism here, of thinking in the intellectual sense, but I am talking about simply using the mind that God has given us to think about what we do and why we do these things. Now, I told you last time that when we started again, I wanted to give you just a little bit of interesting information here from some social scientists and business leaders concerning the lack of thinking that is being done in America today. For instance, one Princeton-based consulting firm that has trained 2 million managers in stores and all types of business situations here in the United States, say that good decision-making skills are used by business managers only 12% of the time. This is their research from training 2 million business managers here in this country. Now, that's an astounding figure there. And these are people, they're not trying to prove anything from a religious point of view. They're only proving something from really the bottom line, which is always the economic point of view here, a business point of view. But the bottom line is, do you make any profit or not? That business managers, of the 2 million they have trained, 12% of them use any good decision-making skills. And they give a list of some of the typical flaws that are made by, and they're not just made by business managers. I'm using this statistic because if this is done by business managers who are there to make a profit, they're concerned about the bottom line, where do you think that leaves the average American out there? It'd be less than 12% ever use good decision-making skills. And here are some of the common flaws, and they give them various names. For instance, one common flaw that is just repeated over and over and over again is what they call poor framing. That is the way in which if it's a question, the way in which the question is asked, that the person allows their response to be dictated by the way the language was framed. For instance, in a business or economic class in college, a professor might give his students a hypothetical business maneuver that offers an 80% chance of success. And he asks them, this class, would you take that maneuver then? It offers an 80% chance of success. And the class overwhelmingly responds, yes, we would involve ourselves in that business maneuver. Then he dismisses that class, and his next class comes in. He gives them the exact same business maneuver, and he says, this business maneuver has a 20% chance of failure. You see, you've said the same thing both times, have you not? It's the way you framed it, though. As soon as you frame it negatively, right away the people say no, and the class overwhelmingly says, no, we wouldn't go that way. And they just turned down what the class before them would overwhelmingly accept because of the way the situation was framed. That's a technical economic example, but listen, we as common people do that all the time. Even in religious questions. It depends on how the statement is framed, and we let the way the statement is framed dictate what we're going to do. And we shouldn't do that. That is a false way to ever make a decision about anything. As soon as someone comes to you and starts with the negative, well, this could not work. There's a possibility this will not work. Do you want to do it? We always say, no, I don't guess so. Even though there is also a great possibility that it may work. It depends on how, and if someone comes to you and says, you know what, there's a possibility that we can do it. You know, with that get up and go attitude, you'll say, well, let's do it then. And there's no difference in the percentage of whether it'll work or not work than the person who came and framed that in a negative sense. Oh, I don't know. There's a 20% chance this just might not work. Just the attitude. You see, the way the situation is framed dictates how we respond. Of course, I hope you all can see that's a terrible way to ever make a decision. unless you happen to make it in the right way that time. But that's not dependent on your skills, though. That's dependent on your thinking ability. That's dependent upon how the situation was framed. Then another common mistake is what they call availability bias. Availability bias. And what this means is that people are often just easy catch for the most readily available evidence, even when that evidence contradicts the larger picture. They're easy catch for whatever the most readily available evidence is. They call this availability bias. You know, you've got an important business decision, that's the context here, but you can put it in a moral situation as well. And we're letting the immediacy of the information that's given to us dictate how we're going to decide. We're either going to decide in favor or contrary to it. Such as the slogan that you see on some executive's desk, "My mind is already made up, don't confuse me with the facts." He's already made his mind up on something quick and snappy in the past, and now he doesn't want to be confused, he says, with the larger picture, with the whole picture. It's almost the first information, the most immediate information, is all we're willing to listen to. We're not willing to get that information, and then get some more information, and then get some more information, and then make a decision. Now, I know this is from a purely secular background, but a lot of this makes a lot of sense. You would be surprised, we're only recently seeing a little bit of a shift in this because of all of the malpractice suits against medical science, which have made people perk their ears up and become a little suspicious. But you'd be surprised back not that long ago how many people who went that route to medical science never bothered to ask for a second opinion about major operations. Never bothered to ask for a second opinion. I mean, that's just common sense. If he says, you know, it's double bypass for you, I'd want several people's opinion on that. You're basing your heart, your very life, on one man's opinion. Sure, he's an expert, but experts make some of these same mistakes here all the time. He may go on the availability of the evidence. It's just the most immediate thing he sees. Well, I think it's double bypass. Or yes, I think the leg needs to be amputated. Or yes, I think all your teeth need to be pulled. Well, you know, once your teeth are gone, they're gone. Maybe they didn't need to go. Maybe you need to ask somebody, not that we're going that route, but I'm saying that's a good illustration, perhaps some of you are familiar with that we see from the world around us. People never bother to ask. I'll give you a humorous story, but it's a true one, though, that a woman was experiencing pain in her side, went to a doctor, and he examined her appendicitis. You need to have your appendix taken out. And she wasn't satisfied with that. She went to another doctor, medical doctor, not a quack, a medical doctor. You've got stomach ulcers. We need to operate. Went to a third doctor. He looked. He said, nothing to worry about. You're with child. That really happened not that long ago. Now, how would the doctor like to be cutting open, and you cut open, there's no ulcers, there's a child in there, a baby in there. And what would have happened with that woman if she would have believed the immediately available evidence? Oftentimes we make decisions, you see, too quickly on that. And there you go and have your appendix cut out, and what you need is a baby taken out of you, and you get your appendix out, or you have something done to your ulcers. And third doctor, nothing wrong, you're with child. So this is called availability bias. You know, you go to a doctor, you got to get some quick information from him. What's wrong with me? Here it is. And we just take it and run. And I don't think people do that quite as much today, but I don't know. I'm not involved in medical science, but I'm sure that goes on a lot still. People worship at the shrine of the medical deities, and if a doctor says this has got to come out or come off or go in, or we've got to do this to your heart, well, doctor's orders, you know, they're even called doctor's orders. Got to follow doctor's orders, and they treat him as though he were infallible in his information. I would hope that if I went that route, I'd ask a half a dozen guys before I let you slit my chest open and operate on my heart. That I'd ask at least a dozen guys. You know, what do you think? A dozen trained medical doctors, what do you think? And then I might get 4 that say yes and 8 that say no. I would probably go with the majority there. But maybe that's another problem of decision making, though. The majority is not always right either. And then here's another thing. I'm just giving you a few tidbits of information here from a Princeton-based report, and I think they're right. Business managers make good decisions 12% of the time. You almost said they never make good decisions. One of the common things is, I'll give you the third one here in a moment, businesses don't treat their customers well enough. And you know what they do in Japan? They treat customer complaints as valuable information about their products that come from people they don't have to pay. In other words, those are non-paying quality controllers there, the customers. And what do we American companies do? We treat them as a nuisance if they bring us information. The Japanese are a step or two ahead of us there. They treat customer complaint as non-paid quality control. You don't even have to hire any quality control people. Just let the customer complaints filter back in, and then you control things. And so what do Americans do? They hire a lot of people. I worked at a factory one time where we had our official. They ran around with their little note boards, clipboards, and they were the snotty ones because they always told us you're not doing well enough, you know. But they get paid a lot of money because the future of the company depends on them. But they're lazy. They don't care. They don't care. And whenever the company gets complaints, not from quality controllers that are paid, but from you and me, the customer, they treat you as a nuisance then. That is a standard business flaw. If I owned something, I'd listen to what my customers had to say. They're the most valuable people you deal with. Not your workers or your quality controllers that are just there so they can punch a clock. It's the people that buy your product. Those are the most important people to get their decision about the matter. And then you rearrange things or alter, add, subtract, change the style based on what the public has to say instead of treating them like a nuisance. But here's a third principle in decision making, which they call the giving of the figure. The giving of the figure. I'll give you an example here. They give one as well. But whenever a figure, a price, is given for an object, it has the tendency to establish the worth of the object somewhere in the vicinity of the price that you give, or the price that's given to you. For instance, if someone's going to appraise something that you have, let's say it's maybe some object of art, and they say, well, do you think this is worth much more than $500? If you think it's worth $5,000, they have already stated the approximate vicinity in which you feel your price has to fall. And often, you see, what happens is the object is worth a lot more than that. This happens with homes sometimes, or it happens with objects as well. They anchor the price in a certain ballpark, and you feel obligated to put yours somewhere in the vicinity. You can't look at them and say, $500, that is absurd. It's worth $5,000. No, you say, well, you know, you hate to go against an expert who's appraising something. You say, well, I thought it was worth maybe more like $550 or $600. The whole time you're just killing yourself on the inside. I can't believe this is happening to me. That happens to people many times in business transactions. I'll give you some examples more in a moment because I'm going to deal with one area here in a moment in more detail, and that concerns the buying of things at garage sales and antiques and so forth. That is a whole business and a sham in itself that if you knew a few things about, you would be able to escape those places with your wallet basically intact. But if you don't know some of the tricks of the trade, you'll be stolen blind in some type of antique sale. Stolen blind in an antique store. Because you see, what they've done, they've already put a price on the object, and they have anchored that in a general ballpark, and you feel like, you know, a lunatic to cut that in half and say, this is all I'm going to pay. Or cut it by as much as, 70%. This is what I'm going to pay, when in fact, they're willing to take that. But no one will ever do that, because the person thinks they're a fool because the price stated is already so high. So these are typical economic decisions that are made here. Then something else they call number 4 is an association bias. an association bias. And here they say that business managers associate, if they've ever had any success in the past, and they often choose a similar course of action because it's associated with some success they've had earlier. Well, of course, the obvious problem there is the past is no proof of what's going on right now. So that's called the association bias here. Now, what this Princeton firm wants to do is to sort out the rules of thumb. You know, they're kind of a lot of intangibles, but the rules of thumb used by human beings to place in a computer so that the computer can make necessary decisions. Now, they've already started this, but the existing machines they have now top out at about 10,000 rules of thumb for decision making. 10,000, including these that I've just given you here. 10,000 rules of thumb in decision making, not just economic decision making, but decision making in general. Some of the social scientists and the business workers are fascinated as to why we make the decisions that we do. Well, the problem with this, number one, existing machines topping out at about 10,000 rules, that is only 10% of the decision-making rules of thumb that a master chess player has in his mind. And you've got that on a machine. In other words, a master chess player has about 100,000 rules of thumb in decision-making stored all up in his mind. Now, it takes a genius to be able to do that, of course. But you've got 100,000 situations of if he does this, this is what I will do. You know the way you and I play chess, you just kind of go at it, hope you win at the end. You start moving and, well, if I got stuck, whoop, I won't do that again, but you forget and do it again later anyway. Most of us are terrible chess players. I'm a terrible chess player because I don't have 100,000, a tenth of a million of rules of thumb in decision-making memorized. So that would say that a machine is worse than a chess player then, a master one, to be sure, if all they can hold are about 10,000 rules of thumb. And then secondly, the problem with that, ever putting it in a machine, even if you got all of those decisions from the chess master, a machine or a computer could never functionally deal with things like the intangibles of nuance, of body language, of inflection. A machine can never deal with that. There's something interesting here in the human being. A chess master, you might could get the 100,000 rules of thumb out of his mind and put it in a machine, but also what he has, not as a rule of thumb, but something as a part of his being, is you observe your opponent. Is he cracking? You know, then that tells you which of those moves to make then. The machine can't look and discern personality. What's going on with the man here? Perspiring, nervous, jittery? That may dictate which of those 100,000 rules of thumb you pull out of your mind and use it. A machine can't deal with nuance. For instance, let me give you this humorous example of one computer's misinterpretation. The headline in the newspaper was this. Now you have to get this down on your paper to see it. World shaken dash Pope shot. You know how headlines just give you it in a brief form. World shaken, Pope shot. Now, do you understand what that means? Yeah. The Pope has been shot and the world has been shaken. All right. Now, a computer had to read that and put it in its own language. And here's what it said. Earthquake in Italy, 1 dead. So you can't deal with nuance there. That's true. If a world has been shaken, and it has to do with the Pope, I see how you could get out of that an earthquake in Italy. and that one has been injured, namely the Pope, although that's not told us here. They use the Pope to supply Italy for an earthquake in Italy. Well, that's a humorous example that really happened with the computer. Computers can't think. They can add according to what you've already put into them, but they don't have any innate abilities. They can't deal with the nuance of language. A person comes up with world shaken, Pope shot, a computer translates that into earthquake in Italy, 1 dead. So let me give you one example concerning rules for dickering over antiques. And it will kind of put some flesh on the bones of what I've said already. Now, these are my own rules, so I don't claim any. I don't claim a source for them except my own rules and my own experience. But I think they'll kind of be in line with maybe some of those rules of thumb or some of those poor rules of thumb in decision making that this Princeton firm has already listed earlier. Some of them will be exactly the same because that's just the way that you have to make decisions. And we'll get into some more spiritual areas here in a moment. I just want to set the scene here again for the fact that if you don't think in the world, if you don't examine life, then you'll be taken. And if you can be taken with antiques, think how you'll be taken with religion and spiritual matters then. Because you've got a powerful enemy behind that. Antique is just your mind against theirs or their greed against your willingness to spend. When it comes to religious or spiritual matters, you have the devil, the arch deceiver and confuser of things against you. And if you don't examine, if you don't think about what you're doing, we won't make it. We won't make it in this world. We don't examine what's going on spiritually. So here are some rules for dickering that we're in a good antique area, by the way. And I would go so far as to say that maybe not all of you know these rules of dickering. And so after we give them to you today, then you can go out and successfully purchase those things you want for your home. I have learned this by experience, and I have some examples, illustrations from my own life that could prove it. All right, number one, here are my rules for dickering, but it shows how to make decisions about things. I would call this know the facts. Know the facts. Here's what I mean by that. What is the item worth in a book? Like a used car, for instance. What is it worth? Or a new car. Do you know typically what the markup is? People just go in and buy and don't think. They just assume, well, what is offered as the price is the price. Well, that's true in some stores. Like down at Kmart, you're going to be able to dicker with one of those people up at the cash register over what you're going to pay for something. You've got to have the right type of store. Dickering's not even allowed. But dickering is always allowed on cars. Amen. And if you know what the markup is, that the markup is $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 or $2,500 on a new car, then you go in and you think, I'm going to knock it down $750, and boy, did I get a steal. Whew! I'm going to laugh all the way to the bank. The one who's laughing to the bank is the salesman there. They marked it up so high you feel good that you got a substantial discount. But he made a lot of money. And, we'll have to go into some more rules. You got to know time of month and things like that to go, and sometimes people will get desperate, and they'll give it to you for $100 over what they paid. It's at least $100 in their pocket. So know what the item is worth. If you can, know what others have recently paid for the object, whatever it is. I'm saying know the facts. In other words, this takes a little more investigation. You can't just say, well, I think I'll just take a Sunday drive and buy something. You have to investigate a little bit. Or if you've got all the money in the world, of course you don't. You don't have to investigate, just go buy. So we're not talking to millionaires, we're talking to normal people. Know what the typical markup is. Know what the typical markup is. You know, I've talked about this years ago when we discussed prosperity in this business of sales, which just irritate me to no end when you hear that a store is having a sale. And what I always want to ask them is, well, are the other things not on sale around here? I thought that's what the store is about, to sell things, to sell things. Everything is on sale around here. But we know what they mean. They've marked something down. Now, true, it's good to go and get something marked down. I mean, I'm going to always go to a sale and get it for that price rather than the price it was a week before. But you don't want to go with the mentality that you're really getting a super bargain, that they are losing money on it, because they're never losing money on it. That's what the typical person goes with the attitude of. So know what a typical markup is. For instance, appliances. The typical markup on appliances is about 30%. So 30%, he's going to make 30% profit over what he's charging. You need to know that. So you know you've got a ballpark. In other words, you can't, after you've heard a message like this, go in and try to get a brand new appliance for 100% down or 90% or 50% because you've gone beyond what he can absorb there. You got to stay within whatever the markup is, and then you can get a reduction. Or since we're talking about antiques, and maybe we'll mention them more often than other things, know that the typical markup of antiques is over 100%. That's a standard markup on antiques is over 100%. That means you should be able to cut antiques in half what they are, what that sticker price says on them. You should be able to cut them in half. Now let me tell you how this happened with me here last summer. Yeah, that was last summer. 2 summers ago, I don't remember, but it was in the summertime that I was headed to get I wasn't headed to get anything. I was going looking. You know, that's what antique shopping is all about. You go look. So I went and looked, and I'll show you how I met this this principle or rule for dickering and knowing the facts. There was a certain object I wanted, and the man selling it, he had a lot of them there, was selling it for a pretty high price, and I wasn't going to pay that. I didn't think it was worth that. And so I stayed around just looking long enough to let him know. It was an individual man, you see. It wasn't like at a Kmart. Long enough to let him know I was interested. But you don't want to hang around too much, or he thinks that you're so bought into that he'll get you for whatever price he's got on it. I stood around long enough to let him know I was interested. And I also wanted to see what other people were going to do that wanted some of these same objects that I was after. And so I noticed a woman came up, and she looked at this object, had a price tag, and she muttered something to her husband. No, we're not going to pay that. We can get it for less than that. And I'm listening like this. And so she goes over and pulls the salesman over to the side. So I just wander around back of them. They don't see me. I wander around back of them. She's whispering in his ear, you know, this is what I'll give you for it. And he said, no. He said, well, if you'll pay me over here so no one else will see that we're doing it. So I'm behind them listening. So I listen carefully, and I hear what the price is that she's going to get that object for. So before he knows that I'm back there, I sneak back around to the front where the objects are, and I look at it some more, and I come over to him, and I say, and I said it out loud here, I said, well, this is what I'll give you for it, the price that I heard the woman say. And I knew he couldn't turn me down because he just gave that woman that, and he said, well, don't say it so loud. Come over here to the side here. So I went over to the side, and I got it for a nice little hefty reduction there that a lot of people aren't going to even bother to do. Just whatever is on the object is on the object. So know the facts. I said know what other people have recently paid for it. I found out what someone recently paid for that a couple of moments before. Now, I don't know if that sounds like maybe too much under the cover or sleight of hand to you, but I'm free to walk wherever I want to in a store. I'm free to walk behind him. He should go to the office or something if he doesn't want me to hear what's being said. Well, I want to hear what she's going to pay for that. I'm not going to pay the price tag on it. It was a high price. And see, I saved myself some money that day because then I went to another place a couple of minutes after that and did another rule I'll give you here in a moment, and I got something else that I wouldn't have been able to get if I didn't save money in the first place. And then I practiced another rule on the second group. I'll tell you what that was here in a moment. So know the facts, if you can find out what the facts are. You know, you have to do a little research or talk to somebody else. And sometimes you either don't have the time or don't have the interest in doing that. Let's hope you've got the money to pay the full price then. Or just take a stab in the dark at a price that he might accept. Then, secondly, know the boss. Dickering with a paid clerk will do little good. Why? They're powerless. You've got to find who the boss is. Sometimes I've been in a place and I said, who owns the place here? Because he's the one who has the business acumen in the first place, not the clerk that he's hired there. The clerk is going to sell it for whatever is on it. And if you try to dicker with the clerk in a store where you can dicker, well, the clerk oftentimes won't dicker. They don't know how. They don't have the skills to. They're afraid they might lose their job. And so sometimes it may be, you know, they may think it's a lack of courtesy, but you might just ask there, well, you know, who owns the store? Where's the manager? Who's the boss here? Because he's always going to be a shrewd fella. He knows that, oh, this person wants to dicker. All right, some business people like to dicker. They like to get into a good dickering match. So know who the boss is. Find the boss. Bypass any paid clerks that are in there. You'll always do better in the long run dealing with the boss and not a paid clerk. Third rule for dickering is know when to move. All of these are no's. Notice. Know the facts, know the boss, know when to move. This is similar to one of those rules I just gave you. It's called strategic anchoring. Strategic anchoring. Once you have let him know, let's say the subject is antiques, that you won't pay the tag price. See, that's his anchoring right there. Once you've let him know, oh, I won't pay that. That's too much. Let him be the one to suggest the price then. Amen. Let him be the one, because you might find yourself in the problem of you suggesting it, and he's smiling behind his back. That's a great price, and he'll dicker with you a little bit, but he loves that price. You've already anchored it. You'll never go below the price that you've anchored. It's called strategic anchoring. If you let him make the price, then you can always go below his. So know when to move. Technically, it's called strategic anchoring. Let the person know, in simple language here, I'm telling you, if this is an antique, let the person know I won't pay the sticker price. You ask them, what will you take for it? Don't you tell them. Don't you tell him what you'll give for it, because you've already anchored yourself. And if it's a bad price for you, he'll take it, and you've lost right away. You don't let any figures come out of your mouth. If you've ever done dickering, you know these are the rules of the trade. You don't dare say a sum. Don't let a figure come out of your mouth. You tell them to make the offer. Of course, if they're real good at it, they'll say, well, what will you give me for it? And you'll say, well, I don't know. What will you take for it? And you go back and forth. Someone's got to say a price sooner or later. Make sure it's him and not you. Strategic anchoring. And then, of course, you counter. Don't accept the price he gives, because he still set it too high. He came down from the tag price to a price that's lower, but that's still too high. Now you counter. If it's a $100 object, and he said, and it's an antique that's marked up 100%, and he says, well, I'll let you have it for, $85.
For the continuation.
If it's a $100 object, and he said, and it's an antique that's marked up 100%, and he says, well, I'll let you have it for, $85. Let you have it for $85. You say, well, I'll give you $60 for it. If you give yourself enough room, don't say 80, because you've again anchored yourself. Say 60, then he'll come down from 85, then you go up from 60, then he comes down from 75, then you go up from 65. Then you'll get stuck at 70 or somewhere in the middle. Fourthly, the examine life. The examine life. Know the day. Here's what I mean by this statement. Many businesses are optimistic at the start of the month. Why? They're hoping it'll be a good month for them. If you go in at the end of the month, you've got two scenarios. It's either been a good month for them financially or a bad month. Most people think according to the month. Gets at the end of June, and you look back, how do we do this month? You've got two scenarios. They either had a good month financially or a bad month. Or if they had a good month, then they're on a high. They've already made their money for that month. They don't mind marking something down here at the conclusion. They've already made their money that month. You say, well, I don't see how it works both ways, though, if you catch them at the end. Well, if they've had a bad month, they're often ready to unload anything to anyone at significant markdowns. So if you antique shop, and these aren't infallible rules. They're called rules of thumb, remember. Rules of thumb don't always work. You may find somebody who's just, that's the price they're going to take, nothing else. So you either buy it or you just cancel out. You don't get it. But you may want to do your shopping at places that do dicker at the end of the month. If they had a good month, they're on a high. They'll let you have it for a discount. If they've had a bad month, they're desperate. They'll let you have it for a discount. Either way, you get the discount. And you're the winner. And then fifthly, I would just give you a general rule that I have a few things under, which is entitled, Know the Subtle Rules. Know the subtle rules. Now these are the rules of body language, nuance, inflection. Know the subtle rules. Here's the first subtle rule, is act confident and knowledgeable. Act confident. Act bold. Kind of bubbly. Kind of assertive. I was once at a sale, this was last spring, I remember, where there were several items that I wanted, several different items that were heavy, very heavy to carry, and they were out on the back of the property. And so I went out there and loaded myself down with all of these objects here, various objects that I barely had enough strength to carry them. I couldn't drag them or I'd ruin them, but barely enough strength to carry them up front where you do your paying. And it was a place where you could dicker. And so here's how I practice this rule of acting confident. Just walk up there, and here you are. They see you already loaded down with goods. And they got price tags on all of them. And I've looked at all of that, added all of that up, and reduced that, and I've got a price that I'm willing to pay. And so you just come up to the table, and other customers are standing around, and you say in a loud voice, "I'll give you," and you say how much money. "I'll give you so much money for these." Well, he looks up at you, and he sees all that, and he's not exactly wanting to turn you down, and then he's got to carry all that stuff back to the room again. So see, I put him in a bind by acting confidently. I'm loaded down here. I say, "Here's what I'll give you." He can tell it's a take it or leave it offer. And I was ready then, if he would say no, I was going to set everything down right then and leave. I wasn't going to put it back up. It was one of those things you didn't have to, and I didn't think it was a lack of courage. This is part of the game when you're dickering. This is just part of the game. See, he read something, a subtle rule. He interpreted that real quickly. All right, this man means business, and if I don't accept that price, I've got to lug all that stuff back to the warehouse back there by myself again. I was going to set it right down in the middle of the aisle there. I was just going to set it and leave it. And so what did he do? He looked at it, he mumbled a little bit, and he said, "Well, okay." And I already had the money, and I just handed it to him and walked away. Had all the stuff. Now, you see, if you come up there and say, "Here are the items, are you willing to take this much for it?" Well, you say, "Of course not." And then you feel like a fool, and you go out of there with your tail between your legs then. So you go in a strong voice, say, "I'll give you X amount for this. Take it or leave it." And when you're loaded down like that, they'll often let you take it right away then. I thought you would enjoy this little exercise this morning. You ought to make a note of these, and of course you can't pull out your pad. Now what to do next here, but you kind of memorize these rules of thumb here. All right, here's my second subtle rule. Well, these are all of my own invention here, but so if they don't work, I guess you can come and complain to me, and I'll pay you the difference or whatever it was you lost. No, I take that back. That's not a blank check to anybody here. All right, here's the second subtle rule. If you don't like his counter, and you don't like the dickering, you don't think the dickering is going very well, then you've got to try something else. And you might want to try this, conferring with a friend or a spouse over in the corner, kind of in hushed tones. As long as the seller sees you doing that, oftentimes it will intimidate him. So if you don't like the way the dickering is going, if my rules haven't worked so far in the dickering, you're still not at an agreeable fixed price, then you may want to kind of go confer over in a corner with a spouse or a friend in hushed tones, not in any frightened sense, in an authoritative, assertive sense. Or you might want to show interest in another item that you like. And then he feels disappointed. Well, I'm not going to get a sale on that like I thought I was. And then he may feel, well, I better come down on this next item, because these people are going to keep moving from one item to another until I give them what they want. But the largest principle to remember here under 5B, when the dickering is not going well, the largest, most important principle here is being prepared to head to the door. You've really got to have that. In other words, if you've already got your heart set on that object, you're going to get stuck. You're going to become a sucker to a price. If you've already got your heart set on an object, you have to go kind of passively. I know that you're not going to buy something you don't like or want. You've got to have some desire for the object, that this is what I want. Don't get your hopes up too high. If your hopes are up too high and the dickering doesn't go well, you're going to break down. You'll collapse and agree with him because you want this object after all. Now, if you got the money, pay for it. I'm just talking about if you want to have some fun practicing dickering. Sometimes I have the money. If he won't come down, I'm going to buy it whether he comes down or not. But if you ever let that out to begin with, you just soon go ahead and stop the dickering right away because he's already picked up on that. If he has any sense, and antique dealers know what they're doing, most of them do. They wouldn't be in the business. They know how to dicker. If he has any suspicion that you are in love with that object, you see people go in and say, oh, I love this. Yeah. And he's behind the counter and he listens to that. He hears that instead of a husband and wife kind of fighting over it. Well, it's kind of junky. What do you think? Herbert, do you like it? Oh, Lucille, I don't know. We'll see what he'll take. And if he hears that, he knows you're not going to pay very much for that item. If he hears you go in and you're drooling all over it and you're just worshiping the object, he's going to get whatever he wants out of that object. So the rule is be prepared to head to the door. Don't get your hopes too high. What I tell you with all those objects I had, I wanted those objects, but I was prepared. You see, I had made my mind up already. If he says no, I'll set him down right here. I'll get in the car and leave. The car was right in front of us there. I'll set him down and get in the car and leave. Because you've still got the chance, and he'll say, well, wait a minute, come on back. Because you called his bluff there. He was bluffing. You called his bluff. He thought that, well, this person's going to come up to my price. You didn't because you put the objects down willing to leave. And he says, well, and I've had that happen. You just put it down and get ready to leave. Your mind is made up. It's either my price or no price on this object. Mine or none. Not yours. Mine or none. And he sees that and he'll call you back and say, well, I'll tell you what. It's not fair. And I'm not going to make any money on it. All these lies, you know. And it's really a disservice to me that you're doing this, but I'll let you have it for that. He wouldn't let you have it if he isn't making something. Or here's the third approach of a subtle rule. This is what I call try the poor boy approach. Now, I don't mean anything that's deceptive here. I'll show you what I mean with an example here. Try the poor boy approach. Or it's also called the this is all I have left approach. Now, you remember the illustration I gave you a moment ago? I overheard the woman conferring with the man. I found out the price, and I got a significant reduction on that, so I saved my billfold, a couple of bills in there. So I got more money. Now I can go buy more things now. And I had money. I was going to spend all of it, but I just wanted to make sure I got enough things for my money that day. So I go to another place, which is not that far from the first place, and I see an object that I like, but I want two of them that are identical. And I've got enough money for one of them and a little bit more, but not enough for two of them. And so what you do is, and that's all I have with me. And so you open your billfold. I went up to it was a woman, and her husband was there also. And I went up to her, and I said, I like both of these. And I opened my billfold, and I showed her I only had one bill left in there. I said, I tell you what, I said, I'll give you this one bill for two of those. Now, she could see that it was enough to pay for one and a little bit more, but not nearly enough to pay for two. Well, of course, what they can do is say, well, no, you've got enough to pay for one. Well, they're only going to make that much money then. They're going to make more money if you can pay for 1 1/4 of them, but still get two of them. So this is a poor boy approach. I did this for something we've got in our home right now. I went up to the woman, and she had to go to her husband, and he looked at me and he said, well, Ma, you're a good-looking man. I don't know what that has to do with it. I was glad I was good-looking that day. I didn't know that I was. I said, I gave him the poor boy approach, and he gave me the, well, you're a good-looking man approach. That's kind of a counter right there. He didn't want me to think that he got taken in by that poor boy approach of mine. Because you go up and you say, this is all I got left. You know, it's a poor boy approach. This is the all I have left maneuver. It's the only bill I have. And I want two of those things. And so he looks at you and gives you the, well, you're a nice looking or courteous person, so that you think that he had the last word to say. I don't care who's got the last word as long as I get my price on it. You can do whatever approach on me you want to as long as I get my price. So as a result, I walked home with two of them for the price of one and a little more. Now, of course, for Christians, the only way you can do the poor boy approach is to tell the truth, though. You can't have your whole bank account in your back pocket. You got to make sure you've only got X amount of money, and this is truly all that I have. Or I guess you could, with maybe a little casuistry, mean this is all I have that I'm willing to spend. I guess that would be appropriate as well. That's all you've got budgeted that day for antiques, so it's either this or none. And I wasn't going to buy one of them. You had to have two for them to match. That was the whole point. I wasn't going to buy one of them. I wanted both of them, but for the price of one. So you try the poor boy approach. And then finally, we'll be through with antiques here, the examined life. Someone wants more rules. Some people think that sales are not lowerable. You know, that if it's already marked down, people get a high on that and think that they've already marked it down. It's not lowerable. They won't go any lower. But often sales are the first things to go lower. I mean, what has the shop owner said by placing an item on sale? What has he said by that? But that he doesn't feel he can get the full price out of it. He's already admitted that to you by putting something on sale. That he doesn't feel it's worth the value of the sticker tack. And so remember that if it's already been marked down, maybe twice, it's lowerable again. Proof of that is they've marked it down to begin with. They've already shown we know we can't get what we're asking for. And so if you'll remember that, then you won't be bluffed by a sale. You'll want a sale of a sale is what you'll want. They brought it down $15 and you'll say you want it down another $20. And they've already shown they're probably willing to do that. That's all part of the process of dickering. Or something else you can do with so-called sale items is look for some defect in it. And say, look at this, it's chipped here on the back. And so nobody hates to be a nerd or a prude and sell you some chipped item for the real price. And if you can find a few nicks and chips and a squeaky hinge on it, say, now look, I got to fix this, or this has got to be oil, all it takes is oily. But this is squeaky here, and it sounds old and rusty to me, and right away, you've kind of shamed them into lowering the price then. And if you remember, if you're having any problems, I hope none of you are with, now does that sound like the Christian thing to do to other people? Antiques are marked up over 100% to begin with, in most places. Now I don't know whether that's true every place you'll go, but I'm talking about the Christian thing to do. They've already marked it up 100, 125%. I think that it's certainly fair to do a little dickering and try to get the price to come down. If you'll open your Bible over to the book of Jeremiah, we can kind of change the train of thought here to a spiritual area. Well, it applies to this area as well, but especially to a spiritual area. Jeremiah 6 and verse 16. We're talking about the examined life. The examined life. Jeremiah gives us, I think, about 3 different steps involved here in the way we live and in examining our life. Jeremiah 6:16, and I think he gives a promise to it as well. First of all, here in Jeremiah 6:16, well, let me read the verse. Thus saith the Lord, stand ye. Now this is Jeremiah to the people in Jerusalem when the city is going to be under siege before long. In the ways and see and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. Well, the first principle here is the challenge to think seriously. Stand in the ways and see. They had, you see, the spiritual thing here, they had the opportunity of standing in the way and observing either the way of God, which was being propounded by the prophet here, Jeremiah, or the way of the multitude in the city, which was, let's fight against Nebuchadnezzar and we shall prevail. Remember, that's what we're talking about here. We're in American culture where if you follow majority opinion, you'll often go wrong. So the first call here is to think and to examine. And then secondly, we have the principle of comparing whatever decision we have to make with the old paths. What he means by this is with the Word of God, or with the way that God has dealt with us in the past. You can make good, wise, spiritual decisions on this basis. Should I do this or should I not do this? First of all, you got to just stand. Too many people run headlong into a snare. Stand still in the ways and look. Behold, see. Secondly, ask for the old paths. Now, where are the old ways? What's the old way of doing this? How has God dealt with me earlier? How has God dealt with this issue in biblical teaching? Ask for the old paths. Too many people want innovation for the sake of innovation. And innovation is often in error. No one can invent anything better than the old paths, if the old paths are scriptural paths. The third principle then here is to, once you've stood at a forked path, you have observed by reflection and recollection, by memory, the old paths, you found out which is the good way, then do something about it. There is the call to action here. Walk therein, and then we have the promise, you shall find rest for your souls. Interesting verse here, hidden away in the Old Testament on knowing and doing what the will of God is. Interesting verse with interesting steps. And the reason I'm here is really because of the first principle, as well as the second, but especially the first one, which gets us to stop and to stand still and to examine life, rather than rushing headlong into something. Rushing headlong often gets us into trouble. Standing, taking time to decide, and then deciding on a correct basis, on the basis of the old paths. The good way. Where is the good way? Where is the good life? Will mean that if we do that, then we'll find rest for our souls. Now we see that the people in Jerusalem didn't. They said, we will not walk therein. Not only are they not willing to walk, they're not really willing to stop and listen to what Jeremiah has to say, because he is an expounder of the old way and of the old paths. Now listen to a commentator, what he has to say. He's seen the same things, by the way, in this passage. This is a liberal commentary. But don't let that scare you. This is perfect conservatism here, that's for sure. I found it interesting to locate this hidden away in an old liberal commentary. He's commenting on Jeremiah 6:16, and he recognizes the three steps here, which I think are obvious for anyone to see there. Stand, ask, and then walk. You got three commands there. Stand, ask, and walk. So he said the first challenge is to serious thought. Stand by the roads, literally upon the ways, that is, at the place where they meet or part, and look, that is, gaze at the guideposts or the signpost. See where it is that you are headed, lest you wind up in a wilderness or over a precipice. Think upon your way. Ponder your paths. He writes, this is a challenge which needs to be issued to many today. This was written back in, I think, maybe the 60s or so. Those who follow the crowd, those who go in for novelty's sake, those who choose pleasure or money as the highest good in life, those who worship at the shrine of science or scholarship or institutional religion. By the way, he's involved in all of those, but he's smart enough here in commenting on the word to say we should observe and not be so hasty to do that. Second, there is a command to be careful careful inquiry into the old paths with a view of ascertaining the good way. This is no brief for an unthinking conservatism. Jeremiah was a rebel prophet who dared to cut across many established customs and conventions of his day. At the same time, however, he was soundly grounded in the covenant faith of Moses and the fathers. The third place there is the call to action. Walk in it. It's not enough to think and to inquire. The first, the stand still, is the think. The ask is the inquire. And then you do something. There must be a positive response. The only way to salvation in Jeremiah's day, or ours for that matter, was that of a turning back to the eternal paths of God. Next comes the accompanying promise, and find rest for your souls. The allusion is to the settling down or relaxation of the whole life of the individual or the group in a situation which makes this possible. The concept of rest in the Scriptures is rich and suggestive, richer, of course, and more personal in the New Testament than in the Old. He concludes, like the ancient Israelites, people today seek rest in various directions, but there's only one path that leads to it, that of commitment to the God of covenant grace, who has manifested himself supremely in the incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Rather wise comments from a liberal commentator there, seeing correctly what the path in Jeremiah, or what the passage, the text in Jeremiah has to say. Now here's something I'd like to kind of round out with. That's a very interesting thing, the difference between being an intellectual and being a thinker. Or let's say it another way, the difference between being a scholar and being a thinker. You know, you never do any true Christian a service by calling him a scholar. You don't really want to be called a scholar. A thinker is something else entirely. Now, what I'm going to do is quote from Professor Bolton of Hope College in Michigan, who recites a well-known contrast. I don't know the origin to this contrast. He's quoting it, and many people have used it. I've seen it several places. But it is a beautiful contrast that maybe would help you understand. We're talking about the examined life, the difference that I intend for you to understand between having an intellect and intellectualism, or the difference between being an intellectual and being a thinker. You know, there is a big difference. A thinker and an intellectual are not the same thing. All right, here's the intellectual. And I quote, because he's quoting whoever coined this years ago, the intellectual cannot endure exaggeration, hesitates to praise or condemn, is tentative and skeptical. He cannot endure exaggeration, hesitates to praise or condemn, is tentative and skeptical. That's a well-known quote. I wish I knew who first said this. A characterization of an intellectual or a scholar. He cannot endure exaggeration, hesitates to praise or condemn. He is tentative and skeptical. Now, do you see what you're writing, what's being said by what you're writing there? I saw this all the time with my professors in seminary. When you become an intellectual, when you study so much, you hate to make a decision one way or the other for anything. You're almost forced into not having the ability to even make a decision because you see all of the pros and all of the cons. And as a result, they balance each other out, and you pretty much just say, well, I don't know, or who knows, or, well, this is my opinion, and you're entitled to your own. See, he hesitates, the second thing, to praise or condemn. He won't praise or condemn. I think education in any field tends to broaden your mind so much, and you become so receptive to others' theories that you hesitate to formulate your own opinion and doctrine. A scholar is tentative and skeptical. Now you contrast that with a thinker, which is what I like to think that I am, and I hope that you are and are becoming. A thinker. Now this is unlike a scholar. A thinker hates indecision. Scholar loves indecision. He loves to give you all the arguments in favor, all the arguments opposed, and then end it by saying, well, I just don't think we can decide here. Scholars love to do that. Not a thinker. A thinker hates indecision. He is at home in a world of clearly demarked categories. Everything's black and white to a thinker. Not to a scholar. Everything is gray to a scholar. I'll give that to you again. He hates indecision. A thinker hates indecision. Is at home in a world of clearly demarked categories. And works toward decisive action. And works toward decisive action. Now, you may not be able to memorize that, but if you can at least pick up the flavor from that, I think that it will do you well in your life. I don't want to be a scholar or an intellectual. Look what characterizes them. They hesitate to praise or condemn. They're tentative and they're skeptical. I've seen that happen over and over and over again. That's exactly what intellectualism does for you. Thinking and intellectualism are not the same thing. Scholarliness and thinking are not necessarily even related to one another. A thinker hates indecision. He wants to either be able to praise or condemn. It's either yes or no to him. He's at home in a world of clearly demarked categories. There are not any things that are kind of broad and they run over into this and those things spill over into that, and there are no boundaries that separate beliefs, but all beliefs are somehow related to one another. He doesn't believe that. He believes that you either end up with a conviction or you don't have a conviction. And one conviction does not equal another conviction. All convictions are different. And perhaps the most important thing, according to James 1 and Jeremiah 6:16 about the thinker, is that all of his study and thinking is geared toward action in his life. He's not one who is satisfied with an armchair, ivory tower approach to things. He's one, the only reason to think about something is so you know what to do about it. I can't think of any other reason to think. But a lot of scholars love to think for the sake of thinking. They don't do anything about it. They don't live their beliefs, but they have certain ideas that they call their beliefs. But according to Jeremiah 6:16, our standing and our asking should be for the purpose of walking, of doing something about it. We study so that we can move ourselves toward decisive action. Now, you see, to be a thinker means you don't have to be the intellectual that a lot of the people are out there in the scholarly circles, who know tons of information, but can't decipher the truth from the information that they have. They got tons of information. I mean, tons of it. Weigh the libraries at any college or university or seminary. Tons of information. But they can't make up their mind. They can't make a decision on all of that information. And even if they did, they don't do anything about it. Thinker loves to pit ideas against each other viciously and see which one comes out the winner. The scholar likes to pit them and just watch the battle. Watch it until doomsday between the Arminian view and the Calvinistic view. Well, we don't really know, but got two interesting alternatives here. Yes, we do. We've got two interesting alternatives, but only one, if any, of those two can be correct, though. Both of them can't be. Either one of those or something outside of those two is correct.